Hey guys, Cubantobacco here for Cuban's Edge, and we're going to run through a quick demonstration of our new range reclaim indicator, the best use cases, and also a quick demonstration of how I like to trade a range. So starting off with some of the basic pieces of the range reclaim indicator, and then we can get into how we trade a range. So as you can see, we have an internal midline here, which changes from your color of choosing, which at this point is blue, and then into a red on a downtrend, blue on the uptrend, red on a downtrend. Now you might have noticed as well that this midline is not perfectly in the center of our plotted outer range, but rather in the center between this green reclaim line and this red reclaim line here as well. In addition to the midline and the reclaim lines that you see down the bottom and the top in red and green, we also have in red and green these range high prints, range low prints, and these pivot points. To understand these pivot points, we have to know that during an uptrend, generally what happens is that the price will be more often than not pushing the range high. And then when we see one of these pivot prints, this is actually the first run of rotation upwards to the low and vice versa to the upside as well, which we can see down here in green. Now the question becomes, why print these red and green lines? Well, generally when trading a range, we have our range high, which you can see here. We have it currently set to using bar closes rather than the wicks of candles. And then you can see we have a reclaim down the low here as well. So when price exceeds the range low or the range high and then reclaims back in, we consider this point a deviation. So as you can see here, this was a deviation through the low, and we also have this deviation through the highs here before price came back into this range. By highlighting these range highs and these range lows, this allows us to instantly identify periods or events when we might expect a reversal, whether that's in an up rotation. This range low could be a great re-entry on a long, and these range high prints could be great times to take profit. Now obviously these signals can't be taken by themselves. They have to be additional confluence into your system as it stands. Now that's a quick tour of the range reclaim indicator. Now the question is, how do we actually trade a range? Well, in 2021, I posted a Twitter thread about how I trade very low time frame ranges and also the pitfalls that strike most unsophisticated traders. Most unsophisticated traders, they tend to enter a trade in the middle of the range, and they might have a feeling about which direction that the range is about to expand into. And what happens though is that on the range edges, say for instance, they are short through this range middle here, price comes up, they will often close that short as it breaks the range high, expecting expansion to the upside. Whereas this point right here, where unsophisticated traders exit, that is where we want to be entering. In this diagram, for instance, that would be a short. And then again, down to the bottom, this is where we would have taken profit on our short, which was a sweep of that low. And then also, if you believe that this was trading up and to the right, then you would be looking for that long position, or what we call a cut and reverse. Now, in addition to that cut and reverse, where we went from short to long, for instance, if we believe that we are in an uptrend and that we are going to get a higher low and a higher high, then we want to be adding at these sweeps of the ranges where unsophisticated traders exit. For instance, if they got long through the center of this range, as so often happens, they might have actually cut their long here, providing liquidity through the range low into what could potentially be support, and that's where we want to enter. We take some size off at the range high because generally the first sweep doesn't result in continuation, and then we look to add again, maybe even in the middle of the range, depending on how low it comes, before we get the actual expansion to the upside. Now, this is all well and good narrating all of these potential trades on a diagram that I had pre-drawn and knowing how this price action was going to play out. But let's see if we can find some examples of this range trading and how just the range reclaim indicator can help us out. Let's jump on the hourly chart and let's generate a random date here. So we've got, okay, so the 15th of January. So let's go down even further to the 15-minute chart and let's replay from the 15th of Jan. Okay, so when we're trading a range, we need to look at exactly what the current market environment is. Obviously, you only trade a range during a ranging environment. This has been going up, making higher lows and higher highs. So this is actually quite convenient because generally after a large expansion, the best way to plot a range is to take the high and the low of the first sweep down. Now that actually might be this one here. And we take the close of each. Now, the settings that I use on the Fib retracement tool, I generally use a 1 to 0 and then a midline, so that's 0.5, and then a 2 and a -1. And now what the 2 is, it is a reflection of the width of this inner range that we're going to use to plot, and we're going to use that as our take profit target. And then on the opposite end as well, that -1 is the same again, but we're going to use that as a take profit target when we're trading short. So as you can see, -1, zeros, 1, 2, 4, and 0.5. All right, so now let's see what this looks like in real time. What we're going to do is we've swept the low of the start of this range. Now we're going to look for a sweep of the highs here. Once that happens, we then use the lowest close at the bottom of the range and we readjust our range. So let's play this out and see what happens here. Sweep the low again. Waiting for that sweep of the highs. Still haven't got it. Notice how we've traded quite a lot of volume in this section here. Still below the midline in this range. And bang, there it is. Okay, so now we've swept the highs here. We readjust the bottom of the range to be the lowest close. And from here, we will then use the highest close, which will be this one, once we resweep this low here. Now, when we go over to the left, we can see that we're in an uptrend. We've just had a massive expansion. The question is, which way is the price going to go? Now that we don't know. So we might decide to trade short. We might have decided to short the sweep of the highs here and then look for either a close position here if we think this is going to come all the way back down. Or conveniently, you can see that this measured range of the center range here has indicated that this would be a great take profit point for a short, or even if we wanted to use this as a long entry. Now, this can be two ways to trade a range. You can use these levels as targets, or as reversals if you believe that you're just going to wick that area. But the most important point here is to note we are using these deviations here as either entry points or points of interest. And the same goes for this sweep of the highs here. That is a very small deviation within our range. Now let's continue watching. And remember what I said as well, how we traded a lot of volume in this lower half of the range. There's the sweep of the highs once again. So let's pause this once again. Now we've closed above the top of the range here. Once that happens, it is more likely that we're going to see some range migration. We've got a pretty substantial amount of what looks like to be price action through the bottom here, and that's almost like a nice base. Now, as this moves up, ideally you probably want to be long through the highs here and targeting that 16-17 level. We almost got it there. Now you may ask, why are we not adjusting the range height here when there's obviously been multiple tags of the range high, there's been closes beyond as well. Well, generally, I don't usually move the range high until I get another sweep of the opposite side. So if we had a sweep of the lows here, that is when I would then use this level here as the new high. Until that point though, this 1539 level, this midline, as you can see, has been very well respected. You can easily see how there is two divides of price action around that separation there as well. We had another reach for the high there. We didn't sweep this one either, and we should hopefully get it here in a second. Again, I'm doing this live. Well, I mean, it's a replay, but I'm seeing this for the first time as well. Now, one thing to note here as well is that we now have a lot of price action above the range, and there is a big, what you might call almost like a market profile gap in more recent volume through the lows here. So, if I was betting, I would say if we re-entered below back into the range here, you could almost target the range lows here for a sweep. And then you would consider this entire piece up here almost a deviation. But remember, our trigger is if it goes back under. There it is, bang. So we had it there. We're on 3x time speed here. But we had the close back within the range, a lot of liquidity, and then straight for the lows, and we swept that low there. Now, this is just one way that you can trade a range. Now, after this low's been swept, obviously what I said before is applicable. We use the highest high, and then this becomes our new range. And as you can see, this price action that was traded above what was the high is now above the middle line. So to really nail down the basics of how we trade a range, we have an initial impulse that is extremely large, and just by chance we've landed that on that one with our replay tool. And then we use the first, you can either use the first candle that fills in the large expansion candle, or you can use the first kind of almost lower or higher low in after the expansion to anchor your range low at. And then from that point, from those 2 points, we're looking at where price action is concentrated, either in the top half of the range or in the lower half, and then either fading on the edges and looking for those deviations. And as you can see now, after having moved our range and expand our range with our very specific set of rules, we now have some very clear regions of where price has been trading, along with a sweep of the low that we saw in real time there. So now it begs the question of how does all of this apply to our new range reclaim indicator? Well, let's take a look, shall we? I used the range reclaim indicator with a look back of 180. That ends up being on the 4-hour chart about a 30-day range. I find that a long back look to really judge when you have true deviations. Obviously, you can use this on low time frame as well, which I'm showing you here on the 15-minute chart. We're also using the bar closes for the range. Now you can untick that and use the highs, but then obviously a new set of rules, and I personally prefer to use bar closes when judging ranges. Now, we also have the range midline. Range midline here, this is a midline that actually just uses the range high and low. It doesn't use the reclaim high and low. I prefer the reclaim high and low myself. The source for level confirmation, we have the close and then we have highs and lows. This is essentially how it determines whether or not a new level has been created. Does it need a sweep with a wick, or does it need a sweep with a close? I personally like to use highs and lows, and you'll find that if you untick it, use bar closes for range, and use highs and lows, you can actually get some quite accurate range high and range low prints during periods where there aren't these large wicks as well. Minimum bars for new level. This is really just how many bars it takes to have passed before a sweep of the highs will generate a reclaim level. I like to keep it at 5. You can keep it at 10. I wouldn't go any lower than 5. Otherwise, you'll just get more and more of these range high and range low prints. So, how does the range reclaim indicator apply specifically to this range that we were mapping out? Well, if you remember, when we first set the range, we set it at this first close, and then we looked for the low, and then we had our range low set here as well. Well, this initial sweep of the close here on the 15-minute actually was a sweep of the range high, and so that got a print, and you can see that due to this large expansion, we have a very large range area through here, and this range here is taking into account the close down here. Now, obviously, trading in such a tight range, we're not going to hit that, but that's just a consequence of using 180 on our range bar look back. So as you can see, for the majority of time as well, price kept relatively well above this reclaim midline here until, and now this would have been a great feature to have while we're watching this live, is we saw how the midline was creeping up higher and higher, and we had this sweep of the high on the wick here as well. Now, all of these pieces of information can feed into your confluence. They can feed into the way that you trade a range. You'll find that you'll notice things when you have an indicator that is automatically drawing all of this for you as well. Now, obviously, it doesn't have the exact same rules as what I set out earlier in this video. It has its own set of rules, which are, in my opinion, just as valuable, or if not more valuable. But the only reason we don't do it manually is just because it's a lot of legwork to continually be readjusting the range lows if the range high is the only one that's going to hit. One of the other features of this range reclaim is how it differentiates itself from regular Donchian channel. Well, this range reclaim, it never actually decays on the top side if the top is the last side that got hit. So you can see up here, this was about 195 bars, right? Which is 15 bars longer than the 180 that we have set. But for any other regular Donchian channel, this would have started to decay on the inside after that first 180 bar high, and then that would have actually flipped the midline. But we've designed this in a way so that the direction that the price is traveling in, it only decays on the opposite side, providing you with a very clear indication of when things are getting tight. And then it got extremely tight towards the highs where we swept and came all the way through. Now, as you can see, if you were using the range high prints as take profits, they would have been all very effective. After each of them, there was quite a large sell-off within this range. And then we had a pivot point here because this level break was the first break of the lows since this up rotation started. And again, this midline being the reclaim midline rather than a regular midline, it is just up and to the right since the 1st of January, actually. This is just straight up and to the right, no flips in this entire range area. And this brought us to, so this was to the 19th of January, so almost 3 weeks of just straight up price action that was extremely easy to follow along and to grab some of the lows here as well. So let's do a few more minutes and see what happens, and we'll see the market reaction and how the range reclaim indicator handles that. Now remember, we said that this red pivot, this is a change of the environment here. We might expect this now to run some further lows or even come back further down towards these range highs. Generally, when price starts trading this far below that reclaim midline, we can expect a different change in behavior here. Now, again, in saying that, if we happen to reclaim above our red reclaim line, looks like we might be doing that now, that would then signal potentially some more upwards trend. It's all about adding confluence to ideas that you are already believe, that are driving your thesis. And see, there's that 180 period decay. Let's pause this here. That 180 period decay after the lows were run as the top started decaying, and then we got a new pivot symbol right there. That pivot symbol, this is obviously the first run of the highs since the lows were run, and now reclaimed this red reclaim line. This now appears to be back within our range and with a long bias. Now, obviously with this long bias, if we happen to come back down and say come back down through this red reclaim, that would be a pretty glaring short. We can plot this line here. Our pivot happened here. If price managed to come down, pick up a long here and then ride that back through the highs, because remember we're still in quite a sustained uptrend here. So let's see what happens. And there it is. So this has just gone straight through the highs, and it's even run the wick high here as well. Fantastic show of strength, and we would have caught that early with that pivot sign there as well. So that's a quick demonstration of Cuban's range reclaim. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout in the Discord, and I'd be happy to answer them.